Right, I've just drawn up the map of the battle now, so we'll just go through it. So, defending Dival was on, just draw it here, named Dival Hill. Oh, Dival Mill. Dival Mill. Defending Dival Mill, the town of Dival, was the Danish. Attacking the town of Dival was the Prussian army. Now, as you can see, there is a river down here called the Alsan River. Now, the Prussians, virtually the Danish had won, I think, one or a couple battles, but the Prussians and the Austrians and the German Confederation were winning the majority of the battles. So, what ended up happening was the Danish had a huge line of defences here, and and a large majority of reserves. So then the Prussians over here had a large line of trenches going up and down the lines, plus one line with huge amounts of artillery. Before 2 o'clock in the morning of I think it was the 18th, the battle. It started on the 7th, I think. Okay. So before the 18th of April 1864, there had been continuous artillery firing on the Danish positions. This was weakening the positions of the Danish. So at 2 o'clock, the Prussians from their trenches moved into position on the main line. And the artillery stopped around 2 o'clock in the morning, and by 10 o'clock in the morning, the advance of the Prussians began. Now, when this huge charge happened, there was something I brought up in my American Civil War video called, God damn it, I forgot the name of the boat. Ironclad. In the American Civil War, there were a new type of boats called ironclads. Ironclads were naval vessels that were made out of metal. Very common today, but back then most ships were made out of wood and oak, or wood, or wooden. But the Danish had a very good navy. So very much like the Americans, they had made their own ironclad. I'll just get up the name for you. The name of the ironclad was Rolf Krake was the name of the Danish ironclad. So what ended up happening was there was huge amounts of fire from the ironclad here that was firing on the Prussian advance. However, it wasn't enough to stop the Prussians advancing onto the Danish lines. So later in the day, in the afternoon, there ended up being huge amounts of carnage in these trenches because the Prussians started to overrun the trenches. However, the majority of the Danish army was in these huge amounts of reserves. The Danish ended up advancing, and this is eventually what happened. Now, what ended up happening with the Danes? The Danes ended up losing this line here. A general retreat by the Danish from the trenches did begin in the afternoon and was then controlled. However, this then very large Danish force then took the advance and tried to counterattack. They tried to counterattack, but then what ended up happening was the Prussians were so well positioned in the Danish previous trenches that they ended up slaughtering about half of the reserves and destroyed the counterattack, causing the Danish to retreat, and then ended up having to surrender large portions of the army. That is the gist. Oh, and then following battles did occur when however, while the Danish did very badly in this battle, one thing did come out of it: the weakness of the Prussian navy, the German Confederation's navy. It was very poor compared to the Danish. So after the battle, the Prussians relayed this, and following a large contingent of Prussian naval vessels were sent from different parts of the Confederation to fight the Danish ironclads, such as the Kakia, the Krafthoff, the Danish ironclad, the Danish battleship. So the battle did end with a general defeat for the Danish, and it is one of those turning points in history where Denmark ended up losing its big position in Europe, because the majority of this was the biggest battle of the Second Schleswig War, and the Danish lost. So after this, the majority of the European continent of Denmark was occupied. The islands, I don't believe, were occupied, but then later, I think it was 1865. So let me check. No, it was that year. Yeah, it was that year. So then, on the 30th of October that year, at the Treaty of Venice, I believe. So then, on the 30th of October at the Treaty of Vienna, Denmark ceded Schleswig, Holstein, and Lunenburg to Prussia and Austria. Denmark was also forced to surrender the enclaves in the western Schleswig that were legally part of Denmark proper and not part of Schleswig, but was allowed to keep the island of Ecos, which had been administered as part of Schleswig. The town of Ribe and its surrounding land, and 8 parishes from Tilsrud Herald, south of Koldberg, As a result of the peace settlement, the land area of Danish monarchy decreased by 40% and the total population reduced from 2.6 million to 1.6 million, about 38.5% of the Danish land. The Danish frontier had retreated about 250 kilometres as measured from the furthest corner of the Duchy of Lunenburg to the new frontier of Tunga River. When the Danish army returned to Copenhagen after the war, they received no cheering or other public acclaim, unlike on their victorious return from the First Swilsburg War. So, this war that the Danish fought was a very big one. It's engraved in Danish history and can be a bit controversial on topics at some dinner tables, because the thing is, it's the big point where Denmark lost its power hold in the world, pretty much. They and this saw the rise of the beginning of German Confederation, as we're about to continue on to. So I will just rub out the board and we'll get on to the next bit. Alright, so after the Prussians and the Austrians and the Confederation had beaten, just check it, had beaten the Danish. As you can see, I've added the Duchy of Schleswig and Holstein to the German Confederation. So Denmark no longer owns them and sees them in the treaty, as I just stated before. Now, I've added a couple other countries because they're going to be important, very important. The new nation, or unified nation of Italy, has appeared down here. So we'll get to it now. In Frankfurt, the free imperial city of Frankfurt, use in the Holy Roman Empire time, in the time of the Holy Roman Empire, was the place where emperors were elected by the princes and kings of the empire and emperors of the empire. But now it was the free city of Frankfurt, and in the Frankfurt am Main in June 14th, 1866, a meeting was being held. Now what had happened was, under the leadership of Otto von Bismarck, Schleswig was given to the Austrians. The Austrians weren't happy about this because they would have to go through Prussian territory to get to their own territory. The other thing that the Austrians were annoyed about was that just straight after the war, the Prussians then marched into Schleswig and occupied Schleswig. That was a territory of Austria. So, what ended up happening was they had a conference between all the ambassadors of all the great powers, of all the powers of the German Confederation. The meeting was to decide what the Confederation would do about Prussia's illegal occupation of Schleswig. So the free city of Frankfurt is here. Now I will just draw some other things.